between 5 and 10 in terms of how concerned they are on a daily basis with climate change. Is that kind of what we were expecting? Our presenters are muted, so I'll introduce them while they find their mute buttons. Today, we're going to be talking about the economics and politics of climate change. You have two professors perfectly poised to give us this information. We have one of our instructors of economics, Angie Thurman, who's also a department chair at the Connect campus, and our professor of government, Kimberly Cox, who also works for the Connect campus. So they have the expertise to talk with us about both economics and politics, and we're going to get into climate change. I also just want to welcome everyone to our first webinar for the fall semester, our Learn to Discern webinar series. This semester is focusing on climate change, which of course is something that affects all of us. So I'm going to let Professors Thurman and Cox take it away. I'm very intrigued by the responses that we're getting. And also, Angie, we can see your text messages.
Yeah, I know. I didn't know I was muted. So let me go back to full screen on this. All right. Well, I'm going to figure out how to go back to full screen on this while we... All right, well, I'll figure that out. But why should we care? Why should anybody care about climate change? And it's more dramatic than just, that we're going to be having changes in the weather or that it's going to get hot. That's what people typically think. Global warming, that means it's going to get hot. But that's not exactly what global warming is. Global warming is a loss of lifestyle due to climate changes that are any kind of extreme. So we're talking not only about an increase in temperature, but we're also talking about changes in the weather overall that produce things like hurricanes and tidal waves and rising levels of the sea. So if you think about all of these things, you're going to have a loss of lifestyle because you might have to move to a more hospitable climate. There's going to be increased cost of heating and cooling. There's going to be water shortages. And when we talk about water shortages, think also anytime there's a shortage of anything, what does that do to the price? It makes it go up. So not only will there not be enough water, but the cost of water will go up, which leads to the cost of food going up. So possible food shortages. There's an increase in natural disasters. We've already seen that. So the bottom line is the reason that you should care about climate change is because it affects everyone's life and wallet. So for global warming impacts alone, we're talking about hurricane damage, which leads to real estate losses, energy cost, and water cost, come with a price tag of 1.8% of our GDP, which is almost $1.9 trillion annually in today's dollars by 2100. So this is it broken down. So here's the global warming price tag. This is only 4 areas. We could have done more. And if you look over at the far right, you'll see the US regions that are most at risk here. And this is Texas. Texas is a Gulf Coast state. Texas is also considered to be in the Southwest, and our western part of our state is in the West. So every single one of these affects our state. So hurricane damage, we know that that affects Houston and all of the Gulf area. That leads to real estate losses. So anybody that has relatives down in the Houston area know that a lot of those houses got flooded. So you may or you may not be able to fix that, but nevertheless, you've got a lot of real estate losses, energy sector costs, and water costs. So when we talk about energy sector costs, think about if a hurricane comes in and we've got offshore drilling. that right there is going to lead to a shortage of oil. If we are dependent on solar energy, or if we're dependent on wind energy and we get one of these natural disasters, it's going to affect that. So if anybody remembers last summer when we were off the grid and Dallas Fort Worth, we were dependent on wind energy, and then that went off the grid. What happened? Everybody was just literally burning up because we had no air conditioning. So think about these things happening more and more and more. You can see the dollar, the subtotal for the impact. So we're talking about trillions of dollars here, and this is on an annual basis, and it's only going to be getting worse. So here's a change in temperature in the US cities as a result of global warming. So pick a city that you're familiar with. So if you go halfway down and you look at Denver, Colorado, not too distant future, Denver is going to be feeling like Memphis, 13 degrees higher on average. So that may not sound like a lot, but if you did that in Fort Worth temperatures, when we get to 100 degrees, think about it being 113 in the summer when it's, just already sweltering. What is that going to do not only to our energy cost, but to the health of those people who may not have adequate cooling? So these are real numbers. These are very serious, and you can see that the impact economically is significant. So what if we just say, you know what, we're going to be fine. We're going to do business as usual because it's just a cycle that it happens. And that's true. A lot of people will come back and they'll say, well, we have this warming, cooling cycle that has gone on for eons. All right, that's true. However, if we don't address this, what will happen? Well, number one, we're going to have the increase in the hurricanes in the Atlantic and Gulf Coast. And we have already seen that. On average, the number of severe hurricanes over the past 20 years has increased, which leads to an inundation of coastal residential real estate. So basically, if the sea level are going to be rising because the temperatures are rising, it doesn't sound like a big deal. But if I said, well, the ocean as a whole is going to go up by 1 inch, and you think, well, that's not anything. It actually is. So, I mean, if you went to your bathtub and you put in 1 inch, another inch, another inch, another inch, and then it was at the top, 1 more inch is going to make the whole thing overflow. So think about that with our oceans. If the oceans go up 1 inch or 2 inches, that is going to really wipe out a lot of real estate. And there's also a lot of low-lying islands where they're not that much higher than the ocean to begin with. Or think of somewhere like the Netherlands, which is all built with dikes and canals. They are at sea level. So you can see that if the oceans are rising, that is going to wipe out a lot of real estate. And then where do those people go? So they're going to be moving inland. And then what does that do to prices and availability of housing? So you can see how one thing leads to another. And then we've got the changing patterns of energy supply and consumption, and the changing patterns of water supply and consumption. And number 4, you're going to be hearing more and more about water supply. Who owns the water? Different states and different countries address this differently. In Texas, if there's water on your property, then you own that. In other places, water rights can be bought and sold. So think about the water supply. Not only the water that you drink, but all the water that is necessary to perform daily tasks and also to irrigate the crops. So if we don't do anything, all of these things are going to be affected in a major way. So what do we do about it? Well, you can either do a carrot or you can do a stick. So if you did a carrot, that would be like you were encouraging people with a positive result. So we could use tax subsidies. For example, right now, people that buy electric cars, you get a tax subsidy. So we could do that. We could do energy buybacks for solar and other clean energy, meaning that you would get a break if you installed solar panels or if you used wind turbines or whatever, something that was not taking away from the electrical grid, but giving back to it. Or you could get cash benefits. So these are carrots that would encourage people to do positive climate change actions. Or we can use a stick, which would be a tax on consumption, penalties for noncompliance, and quotas. So right now, what are we doing? We're doing all of these. So what should we do in the future? Well, you guys are all voters, and you do have the ability to change the trajectory of what's going on here. So if you have a strong opinion about this, this is definitely something that you would want to contact your elected officials about. So I'm interested to see if there's any ideas off the chat of other ways that we could affect a change with climate.
And Angie, I'm going to try to request control. I'm not sure because it's not full screen and what'll happen, but I'm going to try.
Okay, good. And then
see what happens here. All right, it's not letting, I wasn't sure. I don't know if I can move forward. No, it's not letting me.
Let me see if I could.
I apologize. Yeah, because it's not full screen. It won't let me access the little back and forth buttons on the bottom.
Well, let me see if I can get back.
Yeah, I stopped control. Sorry about that.
So you're stopping. All right.
Yeah. Do you?
Okay, let me go back and get it again. And I apologize for this.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, if I want to go. Let me go back and get the whole thing back again. Everybody gets to see everything that I'm doing here. Let me stop presenting for a second.
It's okay. I know one thing that's interesting from what you mentioned is just I'm doing a presentation on Friday on housing, and the migration that's going to happen on the housing market is just, that's a little scary. That it's just going to be hard to live in some of the South and the coastal areas of the U.S. It's going to be so costly. And working prior to this job with businesses, and just I was thinking about I used to review insurance contracts for businesses and the clauses that the insurance companies are putting in, the pricing that they're putting in for different things related to climate, and even now pandemic is just, it's insane. And I think all of those things are things that we don't think about as our individual cost of living, and also if you're a business owner, what it's going to do to your business costs are going to go up extremely.
Yeah. All right. For whatever reason, I'm not able to keep this at full screen and then go back to being a presenter.
I can pull up mine and just move to the slide that's mine. I'll do that real quick, and I'll just go from there. That may be the easiest. Let me get set up and I'll do that.
So Ms. D, are we getting any comments in the chat?
So Lisa has asked, is global warming behind the recent flooding that happened in Venice, Italy?
Well, Venice has always been seasonally flooded. It is getting worse, and that is two problems. One is that Venice is sinking. Every year, Venice sinks because it's built on sort of piers, and it's an ancient city. So if you go there in the fall, it is very common that any hotel that you stay at, even the really, really nice ones, you'll be given boots, and they will have like 4x8s laid all over the place, and that's not uncommon at all. So yes and no, it is getting worse, but Venice is sinking. So if you want to go visit Venice, go now.
Hurry then, right?
Hurry, exactly.
Okay, can you guys see the politics of climate change slide?
No.
We are seeing your notes, Kimberly.
Ah, why? I'm so sorry, you guys.
I know. I don't know what the deal is
I don't
either.
know. Do you see it now?
Yes, it's not
Politics
full
of climate
screen.
change?
We see the presenter view, so we see half the slide and then the thing
Oh.
that says next slide.
Okay, let me one more time. That's not going to help either. Wow, I'm so sorry, guys. What about that? That's just my background, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, goodness me. Is it something I wonder with the... I apologize, you guys. I can't get mine to work either for some reason.
Okay.
And this should be really easy to do. I
I know,
apologize.
it's very weird. Let me, yeah, I'm going to try one more time, okay?
Okay, thank you.
So you guys are going to have to bear with me as I just open it back up.
I was able to pull mine up earlier, so I don't know why it's not doing it.
There it is, but it just won't go full screen for some reason.
I know. I don't know if it's something in the settings because
Angie, you're not in slideshow, so if you go to slideshow, it'll go to full screen.
There we go, from current thing. Ta-da! There, we just needed Allegra.
Yay!
All right. There.
Thank you, Allegra. Let me request control now. Thank you.
I think you might not want to do that. Oh, well, okay. It's okay. There.
Oh, is the slideshow not on yet?
No, it was.
Can you guys see this?
I think I have to do it, though.
Okay, well, I'll just tell you next. So we're on the so you guys can see the politics of climate change.
No, let me go back because you have to give up control.
I'm so sorry, guys.
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay, I've got control's gone on mine.
And now it's gone. Oh my gosh.
There is something up because
okay. There we go. All right.
Okay, and I'll just tell you next when I'm done. I apologize. Okay, we're going to get going on this. All right, so the politics of climate change, does it matter as well? And so I have two pictures up there. There's Nixon, and this is from his State of the Union address, and then Senator Inhofe with the snowball. And so how did we get from Nixon's surprise announcement during climate change on his 1970 State of the Union address to Jim Inhofe bringing a snowball on the floor of the Senate to where we are not now? And I'll kind of walk through, where we are with Biden and the new IPCC report as we go through. Next. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. You guys can, this is just a piece of the State of the Union address, but I did want to look at that bottom part. So this is actually taken from the speech. And Nixon says the automobile is the worst polluter of the air. Adequate control. I apologize. See, adequate control requires further advances in engine design and fuel composition. We shall intensify our research, set increasing strict standards, etc. But down at the bottom says we can no longer afford to consider air and water common property free to be abused by anyone without regard to the consequences. Instead, we should begin now to treat them as scarce resources, which we are no more free to contaminate than we are free to throw garbage into our neighbor's yard. And I was just, when I read through this is just a piece, and he's extremely passionate about it. And what's been happening at this point, Tara, I think, kind of looking at why, is there was our first big oil spill off the coast right before he's elected president in Santa Barbara, California. And I looked it up, and there's 210 gallons a day basically spewing out into, right off the coast of California. And people are really, really mad about this. He actually goes to the location and he says, look, we got to fix this problem. We got to do it now. There's protesters. And so it's a huge, huge deal. Next. Also, too, I looked at the polling at the time to see where the public opinion was. And in 1965, you have 25% of the Americans you can see citing pollution and other environmental issues as an important national issue. But there's a huge jump to 1969 by 50%. So it rose to 75%. So part of it is that oil spill I mentioned, but I wanted to figure out what else is going on, because surely one oil spill is not the only reason we have a 50% jump. And pesticides are going to be one of them. DDT, and I don't know how to say the actual name of this stuff, but DDT was used from 1940 on for malaria, typhus, controlling insects. It's used in both um, domestic and military use, and they're spraying this DDT over everything: crops, livestock, in buildings, homes, gardens. And all of a sudden, as we get close to this time period, there's studies that come out starting in the 1950s, but really in the 1960s, on the toxicological effects. And so they do these tests on animals where, like, cows are getting liver tumors, and it just looks really bad. And today, just so you know, DDT is classified as a carcinogen. The second one is there's a fear of 1950s technology and suburban growth. So all of the highway systems, the suburban growth, the concrete of the suburbia is a concern. And there's writers out there, environmental writers. The big one, and I'm trying to remember her name, is Rachel Carlson. Silent Spring was the big one in 1961 or two. That comes out, and that's a huge persuasion to a lot of people. And also with the cars, one thing I want to mention is leaded gas. And most people probably don't know this, but if you're now, you may, I guess occasionally you probably see sometimes leaded gas maybe at some of the stations, I don't know. But it used to be that cars used leaded gas, and the studies done on leaded gas also were coming out about this time, and they're showing that they're extremely toxic, especially to children in development of children's brains, also causing cancer. And so the new cars, what they do is with the Clean Air Act that'll come out under the Nixon administration, manufacturers will convert to catalytic converters. Leaded gas doesn't work with those, so it's kind of a win-win for the manufacturers as well. But there's just a more of an awareness. There's a growth and change historically, which are causing all of this, change in politics and policy around environmentalism. Next. So at the time, it's really not it's a bipartisan issue. There's no real division over this in the beginning. And I've got some examples there. So we got Earth Day is started. Nixon pledges $10 billion for clean air and water. The EPA is set up, the Environmental Protection Agency. We also get the Clean Air Act under the Nixon administration. And that last one I think is really important. You have 36 proposals during the administration, all passed with very little problems, bipartisan support on both sides. Next. But as we go forward through the Nixon administration, you can see, 1971, 72, we're doing great. We're kind of, getting some of the things done. But as we get 1972, Nixon will veto federal water pollution control amendments. And then in 1973, we're going to have the Arab oil embargo. Basically, what's happening at this point in time is Nixon is having a real clash between environmental policy and economic policies, and trying to increase the market, the US market, and global competition. So there's concerns over that. And there was one really interesting meeting that happened, and with Nixon and environmentalists, and I pulled the quote because he said during this meeting, he says to the environmentalists, all politics is a fad, and your fad is going right now. Get what you can, and here's what I can get you. He's talking to the Sierra Club and some of the other groups of the day. And the president, Philip Berry, gets really mad at Nixon, and for 5 minutes they get into a shouting match during this meeting. So in the end of this bipartisan period, their president basically has an apathy about environmental issues and is more concerned with economic issues. There's almost this like split personality happening within the administration. Next. Then we move into Jimmy Carter and Reagan, and I kind of split there. You can read through some of the differences between the two, but the quotes really say it all. There's a sharp contrast that's pulling away even more. So Carter, when Reagan's in office, Carter's very much environmental. You can see a picture there of him putting solar on top of the White House. And Reagan will actually pull that off of the White House and Obama will reinstall it. But anyway, Carter says that Reagan blames regulation, but those regulations affect health and safety and protect the purity of our air and water. We cannot cast aside those regulations. And on the bottom of the Reagan one, government is not a solution to our problem. He said in 1980, government is the problem. So you have this really big contrast between Carter, who says that the energy crisis is basically the, I think, quote, moral equivalent of war, and he's asking people to like lower their thermostats and literally put on sweaters. And Reagan, on the other hand, saying, you know, look, this regulation needs to step out of the way, government needs to step out of the way. Next. Another big factor for the split that happens to where we are now is in 2010, there's a case called Citizens United. And in this particular case, it's filed by a nonprofit group. And what they're doing is they're challenging finance rules under the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission is wanting to stop them from promoting and airing a film that criticized Hillary Clinton when she was running for president at that time. And the court basically looks at this, and the court said, you know what, corporations under the First Amendment can spend unlimited money as free speech as long as it's not coordinated with the candidate's campaign. And so under this, you see, you know, if you want SwiftBoat veterans or Progress for America, whoever, to put out an ad with unlimited money, as long as a candidate name isn't attached to it, it's fine to do. And this is that dark money spending. This is where you see super PACs really come on to the scene. And the result was a huge rise in spending by outside groups and a huge influence, on with wealthy donors and interest groups. Next. This slide kind of shows the impact, I think. This is from Open Secrets of the Citizens United case. You'll see that if you look towards the right side of each graph, we're looking at the lines going way up on spending. That is after Citizens United. And so, and these are specifically pulled in Open Secrets. You can look at oil and gas lobbying money. They have a lot of graphs. I just pulled two. And you can also see money given by industry to Democrats and Republicans on the left-hand side. So there's a huge increase in oil and gas lobbying money, super PAC money after 2010, in particular to Republicans. Next. So this slide, the next set of slides I wanted to get into are going to look at where we, the public, have a division possibly. And I think that how we view climate change and environmental policy impacts how politicians react to it. So that's why I really want to go into this part on the next couple of slides. So on the left-hand side, you have the estimated percent of adults who think global warming is happening is 72%. That was from 2020. This is from a Yale study. So all these slides are coming from a Yale climate study. And you can see that most of the U.S. is in the yellow to orange area, so that fits with just about 50%. You know, we're not in the blue, but we're not in the red mostly. We're in the yellow. And I think if we go back to the very first, the question we asked, most of us were probably at least 50% or more. So this kind of matches. Most Americans think global warming is happening, and most are at least somewhat worried about global warming. So on the right-hand side, the lighter green is somewhat, the darker green is really worried. So you can see that still people are just kind of somewhat worried, not really worried. Next slide. This one looks more at ideology. So 7 in 10 Americans think global warming is happening. So 70% versus 15, or 4-1. But if you look over in the slide, the red is going to be conservative Republicans, and then you can kind of go up to the top. The dark blue is liberal Democrats. And you know, this is just on, is it happening? And so there's a huge divide between ideological groups on whether climate change is even happening. Next slide. This slide is a majority of Americans think global warming is mostly human caused. So this is whether it's a natural phenomenon or if we're actually the problem. And again, this is split down. It's really interesting. It's very similar, split between ideological groups. And this one's even lower. If you look at the conservative Republicans, we're not at 50% like the last slide, we're at 25%. The Liberal Democrats, the top of it, are kind of close. They were about 74% on the past slide as well. So 57% say human caused, 30% overall say due to natural environmental causes. Next. In this one, about 1 in 5 Americans understand that almost all climate scientists, which is more than 90%, have concluded that human-caused global warming is happening. So this is looking at, do we trust the science? So 1 in 5 trust the science is kind of how this report wrapped this piece up. And again, ideology impacts the views on this as well as on government funding. So this one in particular, I clicked fund research initiatives, and you can see that when we're looking at funding research, again, it's really split along ideological lines. So if you go Liberal Democrats, again, they're up at the top. They say, yes, government should be involved in this. They should fund the research. If we're looking at the bottom of the graph in the red, it's a lot more lower. Next. And I think how we feel about climate change also impacts if we think we can do anything. So how you feel matters in how much you will act. So active, alarmed are more confident that they can affect what their federal, state, and local governments do about global warming. So if you are actively alarmed, if you're really, really worried about this, you are more confident that you can do something to impact local, state, and federal policy on environmental change or environmental policy. If you're moderately confident, less so. So you can see the graphs there, and I think that was kind of an interesting one to look at. I know too, it was interesting in reading this particular report that they did mention that there are barriers, and I saw the other day a Vox report where they looked at Arizona, and it was interesting, they took an overlay of a map of poverty and where there is extreme heat happening, and Vox says it's due to climate change, but they overlay the maps of heat in Arizona. In the city, the hottest areas in the city are also the most poverty dense. And they interview a lady who's working as an activist and trying to get more trees planted. And she said the reason that they're having a hard time is because it's extremely costly. There are barriers involved. The people that live in those poverty areas are renters, so they don't want to pay for watering the trees. The trees can be given by the city if you agree to maintain it, but the landlords and the renters don't want to do it. So they're having a really hard time even getting trees planted. So there's barriers to action, and how you feel about it and its impact and what you can afford do play into this. Next. This one, it is more immediate than ever before. Is it more immediate than ever before? How will this impact politics and government? So more than 4 in 10 Americans think people in the U.S. are being harmed right now by global warming. So it was surprising, under 50% of Americans don't see right now that there's harm. This one was the other side on the right was a little more interesting. Many Americans think they will be harmed by global warming, but think others will be harmed more. So looking at this part of the study, it was almost like we don't feel that impact yet, the majority of us. So there's not that tipping point. And I think, and this is just my opinion in reading this and reading what some of the recommendations were, until we feel that tipping point more, we're going to have a hard time pushing policy. Next. I wanted also to look at how we talk about this. So is the issue talked about enough to matter to many? And I pulled this particular slide. Nearly half of Americans hear about global warming in the media at least once a month. And so 20% said they hear people they know talk about global warming once a month. 70% say they hear people they know talking about several times a year or less, often including 20%, who say they never hear people talk about global warming. And fewer than half, 42% of Americans think they need to act on global warming. So, if we're not hearing about it and it's not at the forefront, I think that's going to play into it too. Now, we'll say that the more snowmageddons we have, like we had here in Texas, if you think about the impact of this, all these slides I just did, if we have another snowmageddon and they haven't fixed our electrical grid, for example, I think that's going to cause us getting closer to that tipping point. Next. Oh, next slide. Yeah, there. So where are we now? What is the Biden administration doing? They have a plan for clean energy revolution and environmental justice. And so the Biden administration has moved really, really quick on this. They reduced greenhouse gas emissions, or have a plan for it, I'll say, in part by setting higher efficiency standards for cars, buildings, consumer appliances. They also recently are doing through OSHA. Even if you look at the work situation on heat, there's a big new initiative. I think I know it's going to come through OSHA to protect workers that are going to be exposed to extreme heat. Working with other nations and securing commitments. That's another one. Re-entered the Paris Climate Accord in November of this year in Glasgow, Scotland. The UN is holding another meeting, excuse me, which the US will be a part of. Just recently in April, there was a 2-day virtual summit on climate that the Biden administration did. So those are some of the things. And if you contrast the federal approach to what's happening at the state level, I think that we're still really hesitant. We're a huge oil and gas state. I pulled a couple quotes from Cornyn and Cruz, our senators, from recent quotes. And Senator John Cornyn called climate change a cult at an energy summit in East Texas recently. He was responding to a question about whether he agreed with sweeping Biden administration plan that I've kind of laid out on this slide. Ted Cruz talked to Glenn Beck and said, let's see, I'm going to try to find it. He said, climate change isn't science, it's religion. Look at the language where they call you a denier. Denier is not the language of science. It was kind of all over the map. But it's really clear that I think that the Biden administration is looking at moving boldly forward. We've got the $3.5 trillion infrastructure thing that they're working on. They're having a hard time with right now. But Gina Raymond, the Commerce Secretary, basically came out recently to talk to business and said, get on board. This is happening. And she basically said, look, last year we spent $96 billion on weather-related events. So this is something that we have to take serious, and this administration is going to move forward. Next. And then lastly, I want to point out the IPCC report. This is the let me see if I can get this right, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. It's a series, I believe it's the 6th, 7th in the series. And I pulled pieces from it because, again, this is a really long report. It was kind of a slog to kind of get through, but I tried to pull the most important parts. And part A1, the very top of this report said, it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. And they're looking at over 14,000 studies, and they're looking at 30 some odd years of data, and they have a lot more science behind this than the previous report. So I'll just kind of wrap it up with that. The United Nations chief called the report a code red for humanity. And the UN summary on this report said that 2 degrees Celsius will be exceeded in the 21st century unless we have a rapid reduction in CO2 and other greenhouse gases. So, and kind of mirroring what Dr. Thurman said, is if not, we're going to see extreme heat waves, heavy precipitation, agricultural and ecological droughts, more intense tropical cyclones, reduced Arctic sea ice, melting of snow cover and permafrost, habitat destruction, extinction of species, higher costs to businesses, governments, and individuals. And I think to kind of wrap it up, my big question is, will anything that we're seeing change minds soon and lead to more support for governmental business and individual responsibility? And to be honest, I think the plans are ambitious, and I don't know that we're at the tipping point yet. I think we're close. And I put in the chat answering the very first question, that for me, I'm at a 7, but for my kids, I'm at a 9. My kids are 13 and 17. I think that they are much more at the tipping point than many adults are. I really think that for younger generations, this is a huge deal, and probably should be for us adults as well.
Okay. So any questions from the chat?
We haven't had any new questions come in. So I'm assuming that that means everybody wants to know how they get credit for attending.
The big question. I will wrap it up by pointing out that the people that can make a change, it's us, and it's all of the students that are on the chat. If this is something that concerns you, then you do need to get involved. You need to contact your elected official, or you need to elect someone else. If that person does not reflect your views, you have the power to change this. So, if we all just sit back and wait for someone else to take action on the things that affect us, that action might not happen. So if this is something that concerns you, you can make a difference.
And I know our last in the series, I guess all of us are going to attempt to look at that, what changes we can make.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you both for presenting. We really appreciate it. For students here that would like to get credit, I have put the link for credit in the chat. Please fill that out. When you fill it out, I need to know your name, your ID number, and which professor has asked you to attend, because that's how they get the roll sheets. Also, if there is a series you would like to see in the future, we're going to start pretty soon working on our spring series, getting that together. So if you have any ideas, please let us know. We are always interested to hear what you guys want to think. And if you have any questions, we'll hang out for a few minutes in the chat. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.